Once upon a time in the Kingdom of Briarvale, where roses grew wild along every stone wall and thorns were sharper than swords, twin princesses were born under a blood moon. The midwives whispered that such births were omens, that twins born when the moon wore crimson would be blessed and cursed in equal measure. They named the firstborn Rosalind, who emerged with a lusty cry, and the second Briar, who came silently into the world with eyes already open as if she had been watching from within. Their father, King Aldric, loved his daughters with the fierce devotion of a man who had lost 3 wives to childbirth and had resigned himself to dying without an heir. He raised them identically, refusing to favor one over the other, teaching them statecraft and swordplay, poetry and strategy. The court whispered that he loved them too well, that he should have remarried and tried for a son, but the king would hear none of it. His daughters would inherit together, he declared, and rule as joint queens when his time came. But the king had not reckoned with the crown itself. The Crown of Briarvale was no ordinary circlet of gold. Forged centuries ago by the kingdom's first queen, it had been tempered in rose oil and blood, enchanted to judge the worthiness of those who would rule. Only a true heir could wear it without pain. The unworthy would bleed, the false would burn, and the wicked would die screaming as thorns erupted from their skulls. It was a brutal magic, but it had kept pretenders and tyrants from the throne for generations. Rosalind and Briar grew into young women as different as summer and winter. Rosalind was bold and bright, beloved by the people, quick to laugh, and quicker to draw her sword in defense of the weak. Briar was thoughtful and quiet, spending her days in the library or the rose garden, speaking more to flowers than to courtiers. The people loved Rosalind's fire, but they respected Briar's wisdom. Both would make fine queens, the court agreed, and perhaps that was why the crown waited patiently in its glass case, biding its time. King Aldric fell ill in the autumn of the princess's 21st year. The court physicians could name no disease, but everyone could see death's shadow lengthening across his face. He called his daughters to his bedside and took their hands in his. "You will rule together," he rasped, his voice thin as parchment. "The crown will choose you both. I have faith." But the king's faith could not change what had already been set in motion. Lady Morgantha had served as the royal herbalist for 30 years, trusted and unremarkable, her small magics useful for healing and growing. No one knew that she had once been in love with King Aldric, that she had been passed over for the first queen, the second, the third. No one knew that each time she tended the roses in the garden, she whispered her bitterness into their roots, feeding them with tears and poison in equal measure. And no one knew that on the night the twins were born, under the blood moon, she had crept into the nursery and placed a curse upon the second-born child. "One twin shall bloom," she had whispered over baby Briar's cradle, "and one shall become the thorns that crown her sister." The curse was slow and subtle, designed to activate only when the question of succession became real. As King Aldric's condition worsened, Briar began to change. It started with her fingertips, which grew rough and woody. She hid them in gloves, thinking it merely dry skin from too much time in the gardens. Then came the stiffness in her joints, the way her skin seemed to harden in patches along her arms. Still, she said nothing, not wanting to worry her dying father, or distract her sister from the preparations for their joint coronation. Rosalind noticed, of course. Twins always do. "You're unwell," she said one evening, catching Briar's wrist as her sister reached for a wine goblet. The glove had slipped, revealing fingers that looked more like twigs than flesh, with small thorns beginning to protrude from the knuckles. Briar pulled away. "It's nothing, a skin condition. It will pass." But it did not pass. As the day of their father's death approached, Briar's transformation accelerated. The woody patches spread up her arms and across her shoulders. Thorns pushed through her skin like teeth erupting. She could no longer hide it, though she tried, wearing high collars and long sleeves even in the warmth of the castle. The court began to whisper. Some said she was cursed. Others said she had made a dark bargain for power. A few, the cruelest, said she was becoming what she had always been inside, cold and sharp and inhuman. Rosalind confronted Lady Morgantha in desperation. "You know herbs and curses," she pleaded. "Help my sister. I'll give you anything." The old woman's smile was thin as a knife blade. "Some transformations cannot be stopped, Your Highness, only accepted." King Aldric died on a gray morning when the roses had all closed their petals as if in mourning. The funeral was attended by nobles from every corner of the kingdom, but all eyes were on the twin princesses, one radiant in her grief, the other hidden beneath a hooded cloak, her movements stiff and careful. The coronation was set for 3 days hence. By then, Briar could barely move. Her legs had begun to transform, her spine curving like a rose stem. Thorns jutted from her shoulders and arms, tearing through her gown. Her face remained human, but her neck was rigid, turning her head in agony. She could not possibly wear the crown. The thorns growing from her skull would prevent it from even touching her head, and the pain would be unimaginable. "You must take the throne alone," Briar whispered to her sister the night before the coronation. Her voice was becoming rough, as if her throat too was changing. "I release you from Father's wish. Rule well, Rosalind. Rule for both of us." Rosalind wept. "There must be a way to break this curse. Let me find the one who cast it. Let me—" "There's no time." Briar's eyes, still human and warm, glistened with tears that ran down cheeks, beginning to harden into bark. "Promise me you'll be the queen our father believed you could be." But Rosalind was her father's daughter, stubborn and fierce. That night, she went to the throne room where the Crown of Briarvale waited in its case. She stared at it for a long time, this thing that judged worthiness, that demanded blood and pain as proof of right to rule. Then she drew her dagger. The coronation dawned clear and bright. The cathedral was packed with nobles and commoners alike, all waiting to see Princess Rosalind crowned as sole queen. But when the great doors opened, 2 figures processed down the aisle. Rosalind walked with her head high, but her hands were wrapped in bandages that seeped red. Beside her, supported by servants, came Briar, her transformation now nearly complete. She was more plant than human, a creature of wood and thorns, beautiful in a terrible way, like a rose bush grown into the shape of a woman. The court gasped. The high priest faltered. But Rosalind marched to the altar and commanded in a voice that rang through the vaulted space, "Bring the crown." When the glass case was opened, Rosalind lifted the crown of Briarvale. The ancient magic thrummed through it, ready to judge, ready to wound the unworthy. She looked at her sister, this creature of thorns, who could never wear a crown, who would bleed and die if she tried. And then Rosalind placed the crown on her own head. The pain was immediate and excruciating. The crown judged her worthy. She was true-born, capable, loved by her people. But Rosalind had done something the crown had never encountered before. The previous night, she had taken her dagger and carved thorns into her own scalp, cutting deep furrows into her flesh and inserting rose thorns beneath the skin, sewing them in with her own hair. She had made herself like her sister. She had chosen to bleed. The crown settled onto her thorn-studded head, and blood ran down her face like a red veil. The court cried out in horror, but Rosalind stood firm, her hand finding Briar's wooden fingers. "We are both thorns now," Rosalind said, her voice steady despite the agony. "We are both roses, and we will rule together as our father wished, or not at all." The magic of the crown shuddered, confused. It had been made to judge worthiness, to test truth, but it had never been asked to accept this. A queen who had wounded herself on purpose, who had taken her sister's curse into her own flesh out of love. The ancient enchantment wavered, searching for precedent, for rules that did not exist. And in that moment of magical uncertainty, something unexpected happened. Lady Morgantha, watching from the back of the cathedral, felt her curse recoil. She had woven it with bitterness and jealousy, with the belief that love was a lie and power was all that mattered. But here stood proof that she was wrong. A princess who had turned herself into thorns rather than rule alone. The curse broke. Briar gasped as feeling returned to her limbs. The wood began to soften, the thorns to recede. It was not instantaneous magic that deep never fully releases its hold, but she was transforming back, becoming human again, though she would always carry the scars, always have a roughness to her skin and a sharpness to her features that had not been there before. Rosalind, too, would carry her scars. The thorns she had embedded in her scalp could not be removed without killing her, so she would wear them always beneath the crown, would bleed a little every day for the rest of her reign. But she smiled through the pain as she felt her sister's fingers become flesh again in her grip. The high priest, recovering from his shock, performed the coronation. He blessed one queen who was becoming human again, and one queen who had made herself monstrous out of love. The court, after a long moment of stunned silence, erupted into cheers. Perhaps they cheered because it was expected, or perhaps because they had witnessed something they would speak of for generations, a kind of magic stronger than curses, a kind of worthiness the crown had never been asked to judge before. Lady Morgantha slipped away during the celebration. Some said she fled the kingdom, others that she walked into the rose gardens and was never seen again, perhaps becoming one of the thorny plants she had tended so bitterly for so long. The twin queens ruled Briarvale for 40 years. Queen Rosalind was the voice and the sword, beloved and bold. Queen Briar was the mind and the heart, wise and gentle, though her skin remained rough as bark, and small thorns would occasionally push through in moments of great emotion. Together, they were neither holy rose nor holy thorn, but something better than either could have been alone. A crown that chose to bleed for love, and a curse that learned to bloom again. The roses in Briarvale grew more beautiful than ever during their reign, and every gardener knew that the most magnificent flowers grew from the sharpest thorns. And so the tale is told.